One of the bigger rising concerns in the gaming industry amidst worker rights and unfair wages is the seemingly long-term danger of becoming a monopoly. But why is that? Well, these concerns stem from the recent studio acquisitions by companies such as Microsoft, Tencent, and Sony, where all sides have been in a tug-of-war to own the most studios, with Microsoft acquiring the entirety of Bethesda and Activision, while Tencent has talking about any company you can imagine.
Mine.
All of these companies have been at a consistent trend lately. In this video, we'll discuss how these acquisitions might impact the future of the games industry, for better or for worse. But before we go any further, it's important to clarify why monopolies are so bad in the first place. For the average consumer, a monopoly will always do more harm than good. When a market is dominated by a small number of key players, there's a danger that these players can then abuse their power to increase prices to customers. This kind of excessive market power can also lead to less innovation, losses in quality, and higher inflation. While it would be unreasonable to attribute this to solely the consequences of a monopoly, it could be argued that the new $70 baseline for many AAA releases does indeed play a part in all of this. On top of that, games are frequently released buggy and unfinished, only to be fixed later with patches. The Disney Overlord. Back in 2019, the entertainment giant Disney acquired Blue Sky Studios, known for producing beloved animated feature films such as Ice Age and Rio. However, in 2021, only 2 years after their acquisition, Blue Sky Studios promptly closed down only 10 months away from their latest project. Disney has also stifled the creativity of its talent by conforming the skill and ability of its workers into a single homogeneous art style, appealing to everyone yet rarely producing movies as striking as something like Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse or Klaus. But you can't do anything about it because Disney has established its monopoly in the animation industry. The funny mouse is too big to be stopped now, and with a CEO that thinks animated movies are only for kids, God forbid what the future of animation is going to be like. This homogeneity and sheer waste of talent is something that will surprise very few people who are familiar with how the gaming industry treats its own talent. Keen viewers among you would notice a similarity between the Disney story and a certain game publisher that was notorious for buying out game studios at one point with absolutely no idea what to do with them until it shut down. It's easy to forget that before Activision Blizzard and Konami, Electronic Arts was the entire gaming community's punching bag for various reasons. EA had established a notoriety for having their newly bought studios shut down after certain projects. Projects that usually felt wildly outside the realm of what the studios had prior experience in. There are so many fatalities in EA's repertoire that it can probably show up as a guest in a new Mortal Kombat game. One of the most egregious examples of this happens to be during the production of Dead Space 3, a game whose development has been well documented at this point. Visceral intended Dead Space 3 to be a survival horror experience where Isaac Clarke would be suffering from psychosis, until influence from higher-ups required Dead Space 3 to be an action co-op game with shoehorned microtransactions. This ultimately resulted in Dead Space 3 selling worse than both of its predecessors, as the game was lambasted by both fans and critics. Fans thought that the series had strayed away from what made it stand out in the first place, while critics called it out for just being a straight-up mediocre action game. This isn't the only case where EA had to shut down an acquired studio. In 2007, EA acquired Pandemic Studios, the developers of the Amazing Star Wars Battlefront and Destroy All Human series. What happened then? They were shut down 2 years later, soon after the release of their last game, The Saboteur. Nick Earl, the EA Games label senior vice president, said, "I want to make it clear that the Pandemic brand and franchises will live on. In the months ahead, we will announce plans for new games based on Pandemic franchises." It's readily apparent that most of Pandemic's IPs did not actually live on. Battlefront died, turning itself into an industry-wide outlet for mockery, and Destroy All Humans did not get a new start until the IP was bought out by THQ Nordic. It has to be mentioned that EA in the present is at a much better place than it previously was, publishing some genuinely great titles such as Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order, Titanfall 2, and It Takes Two. However, EA's legacy is not easily forgotten, and it also shows how mismanagement can ruin an artistic vision. This brings us to Microsoft. a company that owns a large number of game studios and would soon become the third largest gaming company by revenue once the Activision Blizzard deal goes through. This is more concerning because it's no surprise to anyone that Microsoft's treatment of its flagship franchises hasn't been particularly good. Halo Infinite went from being universally loved to the internet's laughingstock in the span of a year. Almost nothing has been done with Gears of War for the better part of 3 years aside from a tactics game. The last Fable game came out 12 years ago, and Halo is basically on life support, just to give a few examples. On the bright side, CEO Phil Spencer has stated on numerous occasions that they prefer to keep a hands-off approach over their acquired studios, giving them way more control over their projects rather than being overly heavy-handed. But that doesn't resolve the problem. The problem is that with the way things are going, it's hard to imagine a future where Microsoft won't use this power to eventually make things worse. We know Sony has already been establishing $70 games as a new norm for the AAA industry because Sony knows that it can. Microsoft currently owns over 23 game studios, way more than Sony, but unlike Sony, a lot of the value on Xbox comes from Game Pass. Game Pass is a golden goose for Microsoft, and they know it. In January of 2022, it was reported that the service had reached 25 million subscribers, and now, almost at the end of the year, the service has only gotten more popular. It's clear to see that the value of Game Pass is increasing ever more, and these rapid acquisitions give Microsoft a major foothold in the subscription service avenue. It's easy to see a future where Microsoft will be able to leverage consumers and drastically increase its prices, and it might be happening sooner than people think. Gaming is an industry that thrives in the free market. While that idea lives on through indie games, AAA gaming is slowly being sucked into a monopoly where artistic vision will eventually be debased for the sake of profit. That is without even mentioning the terrible working conditions in the AAA industry. There was a reason why many voice actors from all corners of the world practically jumped at the opportunity to speak out for Helena Taylor only hours after she came forward about being underpaid. Even though it turned out to be false in the end, the amount of support she received proved how common of a case this is in the gaming industry. Workers are constantly underpaid and exploited for the sake of corporations. In the free market, consumers have the right to protest in the only way possible, with their wallets. Consumers have the choice to purchase a product from a competitor if the competitor offers a better or an equally good alternative product to another company. Within a monopoly, however, a company is going to leverage and practically strong-arm its consumers into submitting to its practices. If recent trends are anything to go by, then the future of the gaming industry is going to be a lot less flattering than what we have hoped. A sad, profit-driven industry that treats its workers like a commodity and suppresses the quality of the art form. In an era where movies that take years of work and passion are referred to with the same label as a YouTube podcast, and an era where games are just labeled content, doesn't seem like it's very far. After all, it might just be the case that business is where art goes to die.